Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the public, those that are joining us via the wonders of webcasting this evening. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's meeting of the Strategic Planning and Infrastructure Committee for Maidstone Borough Council, and that's today, the 8th of December 2020. The meeting is broadcast live and will also be recorded for playback on the council's YouTube channel, and this will include any instant messaging. Can I ask if anybody else is planning on recording? And I ask that not to prevent you, just so that others are aware.
Councillor Mackay, I've reserved the right to.
And that is duly noted by us all, Councillor Mackay. My role as the chairman will continue this evening. However, the responsibility for managing the meeting has temporarily been assigned to the Democratic Services Officer, who for this evening is Miss Parfitt. This officer will not steer the debate, but they will assist in implementing the remote meeting protocols, and they'll also be producing the minutes and provide any procedural advice as we require it. And once again, I would just remind members that instant messaging will be visible to those viewing the meeting, and I would ask you to only use it to indicate your wish to speak, be that by writing question, a question mark, or possibly even a green telephone if you have the symbol. Can I ask the clerk to take the attendance register, please, by reading out the list of committee members, and if I could ask you to confirm that you're here by answering present.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So, Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor English.
Present.
Councillor Garton.
Good evening. Present.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg. Present. Councillor Mackay.
Present.
Councillor Mumford.
Present.
I understand, Chairman, that apologies have been received from Councillor Parfitt-Reid, in which case I should have Councillor Perry.
Present.
Thank you, and Councillor Spooner. Councillor Spooner?
It would appear that perhaps he's MIA.
Potentially. Right.
We'll look for his appearance and register him if he does.
Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Parfitt, can I also ask you to read the list of the officers in attendance and let us know which items they're here for, please?
So with us this evening, we have the Director of Regeneration and Place, William Cornell, the Interim Local Plan Review Director, Philip Coyne, the Head of Planning and Development, Rob Jarman, for item 17, the Planning Team Leader for Mid-Kent Legal, Russell Fitzpatrick, the Strategic Planning Manager, Mark Edgerton, for item 18, Planning Policy Officer, Anna Ironmonger, for item 16, Principal Planning Officer, Tom Gilbert, and we have the Head of Finance, Ellie Dunnett, for items 14, 15 and 19, Senior Business Analyst, Carly Benville, for item 14, Parking Services Manager, Jeff Kitson, Democratic Services Officer, Lara Banks, and myself, Olivia Parfitt, as clerk.
Thank you very much. So item 1 is apologies. We'll formally record those for Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid. And I think we also need to note that Councillor Spooner, if he does arrive, might be leaving at an earlier stage. And if that is the case, I believe Councillor Mrs. Springett will substitute for him. Given that he's not with us at the moment, perhaps that substitution should take immediate effect, but we'll come on to that in a moment. That moment being now, where we record substitute members, please. So we've got Councillor Perry for Councillor Mrs. Parfitt-Reid. And for the time being, Councillor Mrs. Springett, are you happy to sub for Councillor Spooner?
Yes, I am. I was going to take over when he had to leave for another meeting, but I'm happy to sub from this point if necessary.
Thank you. Don't think I've missed anything there. Item 3, urgent items. Just to draw your attention to that which you already know, the amended agenda was published to include an item 19, which is the matter of fees and charges. And also there is an urgent update to that urgent item. which is, I think it's also already been circulated to you, but there's an additional page which doesn't deliver any new information, but it does helpfully set out side by side comparative figures for the budget year to date, the proposed change in income next year, and other bits of information, and the officer will share their screen at the appropriate time. It would seem to make sense to me, if you're in agreement, that I take item 19 before item 16. So what we'll have is the quarter financial update and the KPIs. So we'll have the contextual information that would enable us, I think, to consider fees and charges. If I hear no dissent, I will run the meeting in that sequence. Thank you. We've kind of done it already, but we should formally note the visiting members, which are, visiting members. I have notification of visiting member Councillor Round. I was going to say Springett, but Councillor Mrs. Springett is now sitting. Are there any others that I've missed, Miss Parfitt?
I do believe that we have Councillor Kimmins in attendance this evening as well.
Councillor Kimmins.
Yep, I did register to speak on all items, but I probably will reserve my right.
Okay, Councillor Round had done the same.
I'll stick to 16 though, Councillor Burton.
Okay, so item 16 in particular when we come to it. Thank you.
Yeah, but same for me as well. But
Okay.
like I say, I'll probably reserve my right anyway.
Not a problem. Item 5, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures, please? I hear no indications, so none will be noted. Similar exercise, item 6, disclosures of lobbying. I'm going to ask our clerk to run through the list of members, and I would ask you to answer none or yes, and if it is yes, please specify the agenda item or items.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Councillor Burton.
None other than the matter of local plan review in all respects.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Only the local plan review.
Councillor English.
No, but probably because people knew I was out of the loop.
Councillor Garton.
Same like the previous speakers at number 18 only.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Grigg.
All aspects of local plan.
Councillor Mackay.
No.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Yes, item 18, local plan review.
Councillor Perry.
None.
Councillor Springett.
None.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I ask you to turn your attention to item 8 next, please, members? This is the minutes of our meeting that was held on the 18th of November 2020, circulated with the agenda packs. I trust you've all had time to peruse and consider them. If I hear no dissent, it will be my intention to sign as a correct record at a later date. Is there any dissent? I shall indeed sign them. Item 9, there are no petitions this evening. And item 10, there are no questions from members of the public this evening. And at item 11, I can also confirm that there are no questions to the chairman from other members. Can we go to item 12, please? You'll find it on page 8 in the pack. This is the work programme. I don't think there's any surprises in there. If no one has any comments and I hear nothing, I will consider that to be noted. And it is duly noted. Item 13, there are no reports from outside body members this evening. So we can now get stuck into the good stuff, and we'll start this with agenda item 14. This is the second quarter financial update and performance monitoring report. And I think, Ms. Dunne, you're going to start us, assisted by Ms. Benville.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So this is the second quarter finance performance update, which shows performance up to the end of September. So looking at the financial position to begin with, that's detailed in Appendix 1. We are forecasting an income shortfall in the region of £1.5 million for this committee for the current financial year. As we reported to you previously in quarter one, that's mainly a consequence of reduced income from planning and in particular parking as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns. So we will be recovering a proportion of those losses via the government's compensation scheme for sales fees and charges, and we're currently in the process of completing the second of 4 applications for funding against that scheme, and that will be used to help offset the budget impacts. Moving on to the next part of Appendix 1, we are forecasting an overspend against the local plan review budget in the region of 45,000, and that's as a result of new areas of spending identified during the year in relation to climate change assessments, the local walking and cycling implementation plan, and the extension of contracts for certain specialists. On the capital side, for this committee, expenditure has been quite minimal to date, but we are still anticipating at this point in time that the majority of those funds will be spent before the end of the financial year. I will stop now and I'll hand over to Carly, who will talk you through the performance monitoring appendix, but happy to take any questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, and good evening, Chairman and members. You'll see from Appendix 2 of the report, which is pages 29 and 30 of your packs, that 2 of the 6 targetable indicators did not meet their Q2 targets. They missed them within 10%. The processing of major planning applications missed its target by 4.5%. This was equivalent to 2 applications out of 16, so 14 were indeed processed in a timely manner. However, the manager for the service did point out that the amount of applications for quarter 2 is over 50% higher than for the same period last year. Also, the processing of minor planning applications missed its target, missing it by 2.19%. This is equivalent to 3 minor applications out of the 94 that were processed in total. Set against the current climate, the manager states that this is still delivering a good performance. And good performance can also be seen in the planning enforcement team, whereby priority 1 cases were all dealt with within time, and 94.84% of cases were dealt with for priority 2 were dealt with in time. You'll also see from the report that we have provided data to the committee to be able to see how many open planning enforcement cases there are as of the beginning of the month. I can subsequently provide figures for October and November at 313 cases and 303 cases respectively. And lastly, we can also see good performance in the number of affordable homes delivered in Q2, with 25 more homes being delivered than target. And you may recall that this indicator slipped quite considerably in Q1 during the start of the pandemic, but seems to have recovered and compensated this in Q2. And along with Ellie, I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you both for your very succinct introductions. Councillor Mrs. Springett, I think you're first in the list there tonight.
I am, thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased to hear that the KPIs are looking really good for planning enforcement. I just find them a little bit hard to believe, because when I contact planning enforcement, I just get a message back, sorry, we're really too busy, we're inundated, we can't give you any more information at the moment. And I'm looking at the embracing growth and enabling infrastructure KPIs. I can't give you a page number in the agenda because it's not showing on my iPad. But you've got, it looks really great. Percentage of priority 1 enforcement cases dealt with in time, 100% against a target of 95. That's great. Percentage of priority 2 enforcement cases dealt with in time, 94.84. target of 90. That's great. Then it's got number of enforcement complaints received, 155. That's quite a lot. These are new ones. We're not showing how many we've dealt with and what the outcomes were. So I'm getting one message every time I try and communicate with the planning enforcement team, and I'm getting a totally different message in these KPIs. So I suspect it's not something you can answer this evening, but I'd like to suggest, Chair, that perhaps we ask for a slightly more detailed report on planning enforcement, how many long-term cases there are, what's the status of them. I'd like a report like that brought back to SPI in the future or something along those lines, because I just don't think this KPI is showing us actually what's happening out there. Thank you.
I think I would concur with you, and I do believe that we've requested the total number of outstanding cases to be presented with these quarterly updates. I don't have either of the officers got that information to hand.
So we've, I'll take that one. Thank you, Chairman. We've added a new table to the report, which is on the second page of the KPI report. And that gives a snapshot at the start of that month as to how many open planning enforcement cases there were as of the first Monday in that month. So that's reported, that only started as of the first week of August.
Can you just direct us to a page number?
Yes, of course. In the report, it's page 30, and it's the second chart on that page with a blue heading.
Ah, indeed it is. So what you're saying is between August and September, reasonably static.
And then for the beginning of October, that's jumped up to 313, and then slightly back down to 303 in November. So yes, not a great variance.
All right, I have to confess I hadn't picked up on that. Councillor Mrs. Springer, you were asking more than just the numbers.
Yeah, I was.
Are you actually asking that we put that onto the work programme as a future item?
I would like to see this. I get letters through that tell me an enforcement complaint has been made, and that's all I get. I'm never updated on whether it was found not to be justified, or whether it was dealt with by a planning application, or whether enforcement action is being taken. So I have no idea. I've got zillions of reports for my ward, but I have no idea what the outcomes were. So I'd quite like, and I've got one big one. I'm in an adjoining ward that I am very concerned about, but I can't get any update because I'm told they're a bit busy. So I'd quite like a report really to give us a little bit more detail on current numbers and where we are and how the process works, if that's possible, to come back to SPI.
Well, certainly our rules allow that any member can request an item, so I'll ask our clerk to note that, and Councillor Mrs. Grigg, you and I can pick that up at the next agenda setting, perhaps?
Certainly.
Yeah. Next, I have Councillor English, I think.
I'm a bit baffled by this because I regularly report enforcement actions to the team, and I always get updated. Well, almost always. So I've never once had a response saying that we're too busy to look into it, or so this is quite worrying. Could you please forward me a copy of the relevant emails? Because if some councillors are being treated differently than others, that is something of a concern. Because I've never had that happen, not once. Secondly, I'm a little baffled about saying that some of this information has only existed since August. Planning committee has had a number of reports over the years, which contained all the information that has just been requested. So not quite sure what's going on. It sounds to me like two separate groups of people are compiling information, and that one set of information isn't being provided to the other set of people. So I do think we need to actually sort out quite what the communication issues are here, because all of that information exists and has been on from time to time reported to planning committee over a period of some years. So I'm a little baffled as to why that wasn't made available to Carly.
All right, I think you make some good points there. The vice chair and myself can pick that up at agenda setting, because it could be as simple as that report the planning committee received being shared with this committee as well.
That would be the simple way of doing it, rather than to have two sets of people compiling the same information, or at least get them to talk to each other so they're not duplicating effort.
Okay. Apologies to Councillor Gott, because I think I skipped over you when I went to Councillor English.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry, Patrick.
No worries, Mr. Chairman. Councillor English. No, I just wanted to sort of harp on Councillor Springer's comments. We have the data of new cases, but I would also be interested in having some sort of information of the new cases, which ones are actually new and immediately closed because they didn't warrant anything more than just some simple investigations, and which are new and ongoing cases. So a sort of like an information of what is actually ongoing, because I have a particular case in my ward where apparently the planning officer is struggling to get actually access to the site, and has been going on for about 3 months now, which is rather frustrating. And I've got several residents complaining about no action in that case, which again brings me to a further point: is what is the situation about staffing levels at the moment? It's very nice to have a KPI at 100% or 94%, which really only means, yes, we opened the file and we had a look at it, but do we actually have the staff to go out and investigate these cases properly? So maybe we could have some sort of, Councillor Springer was asking for a more detailed report. I would second that, and certainly have some information on staffing levels in that detailed report as well.
I'm just wondering if Mr. Cornell wants to chip in or leave it until the further report.
That's fine, Chairman. Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Yeah, in terms of staffing in the enforcement team, there is always, relatively high turnover of staff there compared to other areas of the planning service. Quite recently, the team leader left, so we have a vacancy at the moment, but we are looking to sort of redeploy that resource slightly differently to create more sort of boots on the ground, if you like. And I've shared that information quite recently with the chair and vice chair of this committee. So it's a positive step, and hopefully is going to bring about sort of an overall improvement in the service, with more people to get out and start investigating, the new cases as they arise. So hopefully that will provide some assurance.
Thank you. Mr. Fitzpatrick, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, the only thing I would caution about is the detail of the information that's being requested, so long as it is numbers and not details of the cases, because it is an enforcement matter. So I'd just be wary of that. I think all we're asking for at the moment, but I'd just like clarification, is kind of more about more reporting on numbers, not detail.
I think that would be the case. Your assistance would be welcome when we perhaps scope that at the next agenda setting, and we can make sure that that's appropriately considered. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ellie, in her opening statement on this report, pointed out in the report we're projecting a 1.473 million shortfall. It also said we've received the first tranche of funding under 2 schemes. First question is that money included within the 1.473, and that 2 further submissions would be made? I mean, have we got any idea of what we're likely to receive from government? What is our ambition? What is our hope? Ellie.
Hi, Councillor Mackay. Thank you for the question. So what we receive under the sales fees and charges scheme is 75% of our losses, income losses, compared to the budget, if they're deemed eligible within the scheme, and then a 5% deductible is applied to that. So in the first claim that we've submitted, which is for the whole council, it's not just for this committee, there's various different eligible income streams. We have actually recovered £1 million. That's been paid. That is not reflected in these figures. However, there is, I think the caution with it is that that's effectively a payment on account. So there's several chances of the scheme. When we reach the end of the year, if we are found to have deemed to have been overclaiming or been claiming for ineligible income streams, then the government will claw back parts of that, what has been paid to us. So that's the kind of rationale for not, I guess, counting our chickens at this stage and assuming that all of that money's ours. So we're hopeful that this is quite a positive thing. It's quite a generous scheme that we have that will, to a large extent, offset these losses. I think it's fair to say the guidance has been quite open to interpretation. Different authorities have approached this differently. So we're anticipating there'll be a kind of follow-up review exercise by government and potential clawback of some of the money that we've been able to claim back so far. Does that answer your question?
It does. So what we're doing, the 1.473 is worst case scenario. The government have said, in effect, if that is correct, then they would reimburse us 70% of that. Yeah?
Yeah, 75% of eligible losses over 5% of the budgeted income figure.
75%. Sorry, I thought you meant 5% would be deducted from that. Okay, 75. Okay, so we're talking about 335,000, something like that. My mental arithmetic is not what it was, but yeah.
I can get you. I mean, I can dig out the return that we submitted and find what relates to this committee. But
it's watch this space. We've got a long way to go for May, haven't we? Yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A pretty good show by the government, I'm sure you'd agree, Councillor Mackay.
I'm not sure I would, Councillor Burton.
Right, who we got next? I think that's everybody so far. I mean, Councillor Mackay asked the question that I was wanting to ask, but I would like to just dwell for a moment more on the local plan spend. I don't know if any of the, perhaps Mr. Edgerton, could comment any further about how you're seeing the financial future for the local plan review project.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the first thing I would say is that it's obviously under review as we stand. The accelerated timetable will obviously have an impact on our spend. There will be a sort of concertinaing of the spend period. So it is something which is under review at the moment, but it's something which is an emerging picture, and I think we'll be in a position to update that as and when. So at this stage, we'll happy with what's been published and so forth, but it is something that will be reviewed fairly imminently.
A wonderfully vanilla answer. Thank you very much. The only sort of tack on to that I would say, I mean, I know a number of us have been discussing the need to have some really decent policy making around the non-spatial policies. The good bits of planning, as you hear me referring to them, getting decent schemes for room sizes and garden sizes and climate change measures, PV on roofs and all the rest of it. And I think there's a whole load of work there that we do need to consider in the funding. So that's really just a statement from me rather than a question. But I will tack into that the comment in that paragraph, which refers to some of the extra work around climate change. And I think I'm right to say that the council put aside £1 million for climate change work. And I wonder if any of that is allocated to this additional work that the spatial planning team are undertaking. Can anybody shed any light on that?
I can shed light on aspects of that. Yes, that's correct. There is £1 million in the capital programme, which is for climate change initiatives. No, currently none of that funding has been allocated to this area of work as it currently stands.
Is there a process that we need to engage to make that request, or how would it work?
In all honesty, that's probably something we could take away. I don't have the detail on the nature of the work that's been undertaken for this to be able to determine whether or not it would constitute capital spend, which would be one of the factors in determining whether or not the capital funding could be used in that way. And I think the other factor would be what other potential schemes might be likely to come forward to draw against that pot. But I think it's something we could take away and have a look into.
Would members like to know about that, such that we could get a short report back to us at a later date, or am I just barking up a wrong tree there? Any other thoughts from members?
I don't believe you are barking up a wrong tree, David. You will remember I actually raised this myself at our working discussion. I find it difficult to imagine that there are pressing priorities within the climate change spend programme that are more important than getting some of these local plan and planning policies sorted out. And if the money has been allocated to less important priorities than that, frankly, they need to be reallocated through the council's processes, because these issues that we've been talking about are so fundamental to delivering the climate change agenda that they are far more significant than one or two token projects about tree planting or whatever that have been brought forward.
I think then what I'd like to do is ask our clerk to add that into the work programme process, and we can pick that up at agenda setting as well. If there are no other speakers, the report is recommending that we note these matters this evening, so unless there's dissent,
there does seem to be a lot of other speakers, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let me just see. For some reason,
Mr. Jarman, and then there's 5 after that.
Okay, for some reason, my IM is deciding to space itself out, so you get hardly any on the screen. So apologies for that, Mr. Jarman.
I'll write a list in IM who is to come after.
That would be helpful.
Yeah,
Mr.
thank you,
Jarman.
Chairman. I'll be brief, given that the conversation's moved on. Just going back to enforcement, obviously what we do for this committee, as Carly has done tonight, is present back on the performance indicators, whereas from time to time, planning committee gets more what I would call qualitative data. We can talk, as you suggested, Chairman, in our regular forward plan meetings. But obviously, to be very straightforward about this, the more time the enforcement team invests in giving bespoke qualitative information to whomever, takes away time from, as Mr. Cornell said, getting out on site and actually doing the work. What we're moving towards in the medium and long term, like many other authorities and a growing band, is to get as much information online as possible so people in effect can self-serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Gregg has given me a little list there, which has you next, Councillor English.
I'll just say that, yes, it is important not to duplicate the effort, which is why I think that the simplest thing is to make the information that's prepared for one committee available to the other committee, because then you're not duplicating effort. And that is the simplest way of doing it. We do need to move on, as Mr. Jarman said, about getting more information online, though, so that we can actually, as members and parish councillors who sign the relevant standing orders, actually not bother officers and actually let the officers get out there and do the cases, rather than responding to inquiries that we could check ourselves if the IT was right.
Thank you. And next, Mr. Cornell.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, yes, I've just double checked, and the £1 million for biodiversity and climate change is indeed in the capital programme, so it's not going to be something that would fund policy development as such. It's more sort of green infrastructure type projects I would envisage this committee sort of exploring to take its share of that pot. So I just wanted to clarify that for you.
Okay. Perhaps we could follow that through in a little bit more detail at agenda setting. Councillor Mackay?
Funny enough, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to agree with you 100% that we should be improving our standards of housing size, gardens, and even road widths, may I say, onto which large estates should exit and access. So I'll leave it at that.
Lots of territory that I think across all of the groups we're on common ground there. Councillor Mumford.
No, I think you got there. It was to do with climate change funding, but I'm quite satisfied with where we've ended up. Thank you.
Very good. Is that you again, Councillor English, on the list?
I just think that, frankly, one-off work, whether it's has to be done once as opposed to preparing important documents for the council, is not necessarily something that you should be arbitrary about the rules for, and just say, oh well, that's this program is capital, and just go off and find something far less important to spend the money on because we're tied up over a categorisation, which frankly is unwise. It's not as if you're looking at a long-term subsidy on revenue. You're talking about one-off policy documents that need to be done once.
I'm inclined to agree with you there, Councillor English. So as I was saying, we're invited to note all of the above. If there is no dissent, I'll consider it noted. Duly noted. We can move on then to item 15, medium-term financial strategy, and our finance officer for this evening could assist us.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to check, just to clarify, you want to take this report first and then the fees and charges immediately following this?
Yes, that is my intention, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so this is the medium-term financial strategy draft, which sets out basically how we are proposing to deliver the strategic plan in financial terms. So a report was taken to the Policy and Resources Committee in July of this year, which set the scene for the development of the Mtfs. At that point, it was anticipated that COVID-19 would have an ongoing impact on the council's finances, and we made it clear that there would need to be a reprioritisation of strategic objectives and a transformational approach to budget savings. So that remains the case, and the report you have in front of you sets out the draft Mtfs, which fleshes out that message. The key assumptions are that the council tax level will increase by 2% as the referendum limit, and that our share of business rates income will be based on effectively a roll forward for 1 year of the existing arrangements. We're also looking at a sort of slow, gradual recovery in our other income streams as a result of the impact of COVID-19. So there's a couple of sort of messages from the Chancellor's spending review. He confirmed that 2% ceiling on council tax increases and the 1 year roll forward of the business rates income position. Another key message from the spending review from the viewpoint of the capital programme is that our borrowing costs are likely to be reduced by around 1%, and that's on the provision that we aren't investing solely for yield, which would mean that we weren't able to access that borrowing. So the Mtfs is accompanied by a survey of our residents. There are some positive messages about residents being proud of the borough and fewer who are dissatisfied with it as a place to live. The views about council's value for money overall are similar to the views that we've seen in previous years. Probably the most relevant points for budget setting is knowing that services that residents value the most, which are waste collection, parks and open spaces. So next steps in terms of this report will be for the strategic revenue projections to be updated in the light of the spending review and the local government finance settlement, which we are expecting next week. And following that, we will be bringing back detailed budget proposals relevant to each committee, which are currently being developed. They'll come round to be presented to committees at your meetings in January. Again, very happy to take any questions on the detail of that report, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So we're invited to comment at this stage, but I'm personally thinking that until we begin to see the more detailed proposals, which will have elements of the rollout of transformation proposals, there's not a lot we can say other than acknowledging, yeah, there's quite a challenge ahead. Councillor English, you wanting to come in?
I was just going to agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that at this stage it's pointless having a detailed discussion, which we'll only have to revisit in the future.
So if we record our response that no comments at this stage, pending the more detailed proposals due in January. So I think we can conclude that item. And that actually allows us to move to agenda item 19, as I indicated earlier. That's fees and charges, and it's Ms. Dunny again.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before I start, Olivia, were you able to display that additional information on the screen that was circulated by email? Yes, I'm just showing that now. If I could have confirmation that it's viewable.
Yep, that's through. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I will come to that in a second. So this report comprises the outputs of the annual review of fees and charges in line with our charging policy. Appendix 1 to the report sets out the proposed fees and charges for the next financial year. And for the discretionary charges, members are asked to agree the proposals at this point. There are also charges detailed which are set externally. They've been included for information within Appendix 1. The headline messages from the report are that we are seeking to implement the changes previously agreed for parking services, which have been due to be implemented from the 1st of April this year, but which were deferred due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In other areas, there are some inflationary increases proposed for building control, and the report also details a series of changes to planning pre-application advice charges, which follow a benchmarking exercise undertaken by planning officers, and details of that benchmarking exercise are set out within Appendix 2 to the report. So the additional information you have in front of you is in relation to the table on page 218 of the agenda pack, and that was circulated to committee members last Friday by email. This basically summarises some information about the income budgets and performance, and that's just been included for context to kind of help members with their consideration of the proposed charges. Just to clarify, the committee aren't being asked to approve those budgets as part of this report, and they should be treated as indicative at this stage. So they're still being worked on and they might be subject to change. So the additional information on the screen, just to be clear, is the middle column, which sets out the forecast outturn for the current financial year, and hopefully that provides the context for the anticipated 13.8% reduction in income levels for this committee for the next financial year. I will leave it there, but again, very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garton, you're first on the list, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I note at page 219, paragraph 2.13. Firstly, the income budget for on-street parking has been reduced by £26,000 per annum following the installation of the new cycle lane in King Street, resulting in the loss of on-street parking bays. This cycle lane has been criticised by many people in the press openly. People are just shaking their head at it broadly, including cyclists actually. But we are asking now to increase parking charges, and then we are wasting £26,000, and that all on the background of COVID, where the business community is struggling to get feet back on the ground into the shops. I think we would be setting an incredibly politically hot potato precedent by actually introducing or increasing parking charges in Maidstone. I will not vote for that increase. We need to get people back into Maidstone, make Maidstone attractive. If anything, if parking charges are reasonably low in Maidstone, which I believe they are, we should advertise it. And actually, rather than increasing the fees, we should actually increase the numbers of people coming into Maidstone and thereby increasing our revenue. As far as the other charges are concerned, with regards to development control, I'm again a little bit baffled about the low fees Maidstone Borough is charging compared to other local authorities for major development. Now, while I'm not a great fan of introducing or increasing charges for small or householder applications of pre-planning advice, development control for major and pre-planning advice in particular for major projects, I think there's a lot of scope where we can make up for the deficits we've been looking at tonight. Parking for the consumer in Maidstone is not where we should plug any deficit.
I will just make us all aware we do have our parking services manager, Mr. Kitson, on hand if there are any specific sort of questions that we want to raise around the wisdom of some of this. Councillor English?
Yeah, where do you start with that, Rand? But anyway, never mind. I do agree with some of it. Let's be clear. The discretion for councils to set their fee levels for planning applications is severely limited in a lot of areas. It is somewhat less limited in terms of pre-application discussions where there is more scope. And I do agree that we should be looking at significantly, well, we should be looking at least making sure we don't make a loss on it. And so there is room for consideration there further, I think. What I would say on the parking charges, well, let's start with the cycle lane so I can continue to agree with Councillor Garden for a while. Yes, this was a misconceived abomination. I'm very much, as people know, in favour of measures to promote cycling and walking. I'm not in favour of spatchcock, badly designed schemes being put in without any consultation with anyone, just in order to spend money according to a deadline. And what I would say is that we are supposed according to the county council, to have a full consultation on this. Now, I can understand why it might have been delayed due to a current second lockdown phase, but we're actually in the period now when we were promised a full consultation on what would happen with that scheme and Oil Street, and obviously we haven't heard anything at all. I don't, however, think that this particular scheme was a major contribution to the parking losses. It didn't help, but it wasn't a major contribution. A lot of the major contribution has been self-inflicted because we as a council have taken out of operation a number of car parks for development purposes. Yes, in some cases those come back into operation, like Union Street, but that does cause a significant loss of operational revenue in the short term. So we have to be aware that, you know, these development schemes that the council promotes, they do have a downside in terms of the council's finances, and it's not all good news. But be clear that if we don't approve these charges, we're not really refusing to have an increase. What we're saying is, in effect, that we need to find even more substantial savings than we were expected to save, because the anticipated increase won't be happening. So if you are intent on reversing this, be aware of just quite what that means, and also bear in mind that all the evidence is that the actual level of parking charges in terms of its relation to demand is relatively a minor factor in determining where people actually go, and there is very little evidence that it has any major effect in changing where people actually go and shop.
Councillor Mrs. Gregg.
Thank you, Chairman. Just like to say that I do totally disagree with Councillor Garton, and I feel that we have deferred this item due to the COVID restrictions, and actually even with this small increase our parking charges are still low, and I do feel that at this stage we should go on rather than wait and have to potentially put up a much higher price later on. I think it will be easier to do a small increase now. And my second point is on 2.18 Sandling Road car park. It's just for some clarity, really. I see that there are no changes are proposed to the existing charges at that particular car park, and I'd wonder why, if someone can answer why that has actually been channeled out as for special consideration. I think that if we're going to do the charges, they should all be consistent and across the board. So I wonder if someone could answer that, please.
Mr. Kitson, can you shed any light on that?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Yes, Maidstone East, the Sandlin Road car park. The tariff for that car park is actually controlled through the Maidstone East Strategy Board. I understand that they can review charges at any point of the year. So if a tariff increase was considered, I understand it can be included in the next Strategy Board agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kitson. Obviously, depending on what our position is tonight, that may be something we want to consider asking for.
Yes, that's fine. I can make a note of that, and if that decision was made, we can I can pass that through to ensure that it's on the next agenda.
For the sake of transparency, I sit on that board, so I can't wait to see that, Mr. Kitson. Councillor Mrs. Springett.
I think you missed me.
Oh, apologies. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Clark, and then I'll come to Councillor Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. Yes, I think my two colleagues have actually hit the nail on the head, so I won't go back over there. But I would point out that this is an inflationary increase. We're not hiking up parking charges. In fact, we've deferred it. So we've given a concession, and I think if we don't keep up with inflation, then we're not serving our residents. That's something that we need to at least be mindful for. And in terms of whether or not we should do this when the cycle lane's been put in, I think they're very different issues. The funding source came from the government. The mandate was to spend the money as soon as possible, and it came through KCC. It would almost be like saying we shouldn't increase car parking charges because there are potholes on the roads approaching them. I think it's very different, and I think I will support this inflationary change.
Councillor Mrs. Springer.
Thank you. I'm disappointed that we're about to hit our residents again with more parking charges. The furlough's all been extended till March, and we're trying to help residents in that respect. But I am disappointed. Actually, I'm more disappointed that KCC think it's acceptable to put this damn awful cycle lane in King Street, take away some of our parking, which gives us quite a significant cost to our budget. And this will be ongoing for as long as that flipping cycle lane is there. So I suggest we ask them to either recompense us for that loss or take the flipping cycle lane out and put the parking spaces back. That's a lot of money that we've lost at no fault of our own by very bad planning by KCC. And I don't think our residents should have to fork up extra parking to compensate for a stupid decision by KCC. Sorry, a bit frustrated by that one.
And Councillor Perry. Councillor Perry.
Sorry, I was indulging in Maidstone Borough Council's favourite sport of mouse playing. Yeah, I support a freeze of the car parking charges, and I don't agree with Councillor English that it doesn't have an effect on people's shopping and use of the town. I think there's plenty of evidence that supports the complete opposite of that. It is not just an inflation increase, is it? It's actually a lot more than that. So again, I totally think this is the timing of this is extremely bad, and I think we should recognise that, and we should not increase the car parking charge. On the other point that I think was highlighted by Councillor Garton, I think it's a very strong one on the pre-planning application charges. I mean, they do seem to be incredibly light to me compared with a lot of the Kent averages, and I think we should be looking at those again to see whether we can put in a much more realistic charge. So just to conclude, I believe we should freeze the council tax. I think that we should encourage people to come in to shop in the town. I think this should be part of it. Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should bring Mr. Jarman in to perhaps provide some comment about pre-app charges and the scope there.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd draw your attention to Appendix 2. And I believe this is in line with what councillors desire, but I'm also aware of the rate of inflation, you know, the difficult times all businesses are going through with COVID-19 and Brexit uncertainty. But anyway, to cut to the chase, if one looks at large-scale pre-apps, 40 plus that is, what is being proposed, for instance, for a meeting and a letter is an increase of from £660 to £825 per hour, and a site meeting and letter up from £795 to £950. To my mind, those are very substantial increases in the current economic climate. Two other points. Obviously, it's very difficult to do almost forensic benchmarking exercises because one's not comparing like for like. I know for a fact that what Maidstone classes as a large application 40 plus is not what Swale classes as a large scale application, or Ashford. Most authorities, it's usually over 100. So it's not apples and apples. And secondly, with such a large increase, and Ellie Dunnett explained this, obviously developers can turn around and say, well, show me exactly why I need to pay £950. So I'd caution against any further increases. I think these, clearly we've got a budget deficit, but in my view, we're close to maxing out on these increases. And like I think Councillor Patrick Garton said earlier tonight, there's a hell of a difference between what you ask for in money and the amount of transactions you get. Simply by increasing fees doesn't increase your volumes. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
I think we might usefully deploy that line of logic on car park charges in a minute, but building on what you're saying there about, other authorities perhaps, look at large as 100 plus, does that not invite us having maybe even a further category where we do look at 100 plus with a larger fee? Because, I know we're not comparing apples for apples, but the average for a site meeting and a letter is 2,800, and we're proposing 950. So there must be a trick missing there somewhere.
Yes, we could, but I would say that we don't get many of the 100 plus proposals. When we do, in my experience, I think I'm right in saying that every single time they're accompanied by a planning performance agreement, which is outside of this.
Is there any scope with, charges on planning performance agreements?
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, the direction of travel. If the in my opinion, significant fee increases are accepted tonight, then the logical direction of travel for PPAs is to increase those as well by a similar amount in percentage terms.
PPAs are not compulsory, but then neither is pre-app advice, is it?
Yeah, correct.
It's almost, yeah. I was trying to think out a route where you don't offer pre-app advice and you only go PPA, but personally, I completely abhor the principle of PPAs. But that's a debate for another evening. Okay. Just trying to catch up with the IM, make sure that where we're at.
You've got Councillor Mumford and Councillor Springett.
Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, just very quickly, I've listened to the discussion you've just had. I was going to speak about major projects, but if we can look at my view, and this is only my view, I do not think that parking charges affects the frequency of people using the town. But I do agree with Councillor Springett about the cycle path, and is it possible for this committee to make representations along the lines that Councillor Springett said? Well, that stopped the show, didn't it, Mr. Chairman?
I would have no objection to doing that, Councillor Mumford, if you want to propose we do. I don't know what other people think.
Yeah, I think Val worded that correctly in that we should make representations, say remove it or replace some of our costs that it's caused. Maybe we've got a chairman back, God knows.
I don't know where he's gone, but
yeah, I was losing connection there, so may have a gap or two. I think we need to distill these issues that we've discussed into bite-sized chunks to get individual direction on them. Shall we start with the issue of car parking fees? I've not spoken on that. I've thought long and hard about this. If I was putting my businessman hat on, I think for us to turn around and say to residents we're increasing car parking charges has quite significant reputational harm associated to it. And I'm sure there will be some loss of patronage, though it might be minor. I would personally, if it were my business, I would attack it from a different way. And I would actually put our comms team to work, actually advertising how much freely available parking we have, and that we've held the price yet again, and actually we're the cheapest in town, and that we should have a campaign to drive patronage to our car parks and away from our competitors that are actually listed in the report. And I think that's actually a much more positive message to give the public. It's supportive to town centre businesses at this time. And if we drove that in a positive communications manner, I would take a reasonable wager with anyone that we would get more income. So on that basis, I would move that we fix the car park charges for a further year and have a campaign to actually market them to our customers.
I quite like that idea, or even if we fixed them for 6 months, I think that's a good idea.
I think we should consider this in a unit of a year, because we annually review.
You've got to do them for a year. You can't do it for 6 months.
So I've moved that. I think I might be getting a seconder with Councillor Mrs. Springett, but I see that Councillor Mackay wants to come in at this stage.
I think this is one of the few areas where you can have your cake and eat it, quite possibly. You can keep the charges as they are and reduce the time you get for your £1.50 or £2.50. Now, quite frankly, you have your cake and eat it. You have your increase effectively, but people don't quite see it as an increase.
That sounds like a politician preparing a budget statement.
Well, can I remind you, we are politicians.
Well, okay. I was attempting to apply some sensible business principles to this. And
I thought that's what I just did.
Well, we've got a wonderful opportunity to promote our car parks over the competition. If we had a 10% shift in patronage, it's worth a heck of a lot more than what is actually pennies on the charges. When did this council last take to the market, do an advertising campaign, do something proactive to say, look, we've got the best value for parking in town, why don't you use us? So I have moved. I think Councillor Mrs. Springett has seconded, and certainly Councillor Garton has, if not. Would anybody else like to speak before we put that to a vote?
Yeah, very quickly. You're assuming that the location doesn't matter when someone goes into town parking, where I think it does matter. And I think people look for convenience, will pay for convenience, and to be closer to somewhere they wanted to go would be better. But that's just my view.
My view is we're making a decision way too early.
Well, I mean, if I could just come back to Councillor Mumford there, I'm actually saying, do the public realise that if you go to one car park, it's nearly 10 quid, and we can do it for a £5.
If the public don't, I do, because I will queue for the Marks and Spencer's car park because it's the cheapest and it's very convenient, and I will not park in Fremlins because it's expensive. So I do pay attention to parking fees.
I'd still like to come back and say, yes, I agree with the principle of what you're saying, David, but then I would also like to say, yeah, come to us, because we're not £10, we're £7.50. And I think this is a very dangerous game to start playing. Are we going to say that because of COVID and because of the situation, we're not going to increase anything anytime until this is all over? I think it's very dangerous to start playing these games.
Agreed. I think there's another factor here that, in terms of serving our residents, if we don't increase charges, perhaps some of these other operators might not. And we're actually serving the town centre businesses. Anyway, I think we might go around this a few times.
Yes.
And we should just cut to a decision, and whatever that is, we move on. So the motion is that we hold parking charges and mount a marketing exercise to promote the use of our car parks. Can I ask you to call the vote, please?
Yes, Chairman. If possible, could I just read out the wording that I had put down, as I know you have summarised, but I have put some wording together, that the car park charges remain fixed for another year, and that the communications team be requested to publicise the car parks available within the borough.
And the good value thereof, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Councillor Burton.
For.
Councillor Clark.
Against.
Councillor English.
Against.
Councillor Garton.
For.
Councillor Mrs Grigg.
Against.
Councillor Mackay.
Against.
Councillor Mumford.
Against.
And the result,
Councillor Perry.
For.
And Councillor Springett.
For.
That's 4-4, but 5 against. It falls, Chairman.
Thank you. That motion fails. Do we need to focus on the pre-app matter that we've discussed? Is anybody minded to make a motion around that, or are we?
Can I just clarify a point, Mr. Burton, please, on that before we do?
Of course.
Can Mr. Jarman tell me whether a potential increase in the PPA fees has been factored in, and whether, because that is a potential increase if we're increasing the other fees, isn't it? Is it in or not already?
No, Councillor English, it hasn't been factored into this particular report. As I said earlier, the logical direction of travel would be to increase PPAs by a roughly commensurate amount with the major and large major pre-application fees.
Would I suggest that rather than saying that's the logical development, we actually agree that we really should do that? Can I propose that?
I'll second that.
Yep, okay.
So, just to get clarification that we're specific enough, that what we're saying is that PPA charges will be increased
in proportion to the increase of the pre-application charges.
Yeah, I think that the difficulty is probably there isn't a set fee for PPAs, and it's not transparent. Whether we're charging a lot for a PPA or we actually put it up and it now looks like a lot.
Is there another way of looking at this? Could we have a set fee for a set number of hours, and then if more hours are required, there is an additional hourly charge for officer time? Because I'm wondering whether we've ever costed officer time to see how the cost compares to what we charge, and whether perhaps we have a set fee, covers a certain number of hours, and if your application is more complex or more complicated and requires another 5 hours of officer time, it cost you a bit more.
It's not quite how the agreements tend to work, but
No. I mean, I personally think that we should be requesting officers implement a time billing system so they actually have management data to monitor delivery of the services against the fees charged.
Okay, well, I beg your pardon, Chairman. If we're talking about PPAs, the PPA charge is per hour.
Yeah, it's quite.
Is that listed in this report, Mr. Jarman?
Well, this is obviously this is not PPAs. This is pre-application charges, but it's the same for pre-application charges. So if one goes into a second hour, one ends up paying the full amount for that second hour. And in relation to what Councillor Springett said, if there's an additional officer, then one pays an extra amount for the additional officer, such as a conservation officer or somebody like myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Thank you.
So anyway, could we agree as a principle? Obviously, there's a bit of work to be done on the exact level, but we would like to see this brought forward.
What I'm just struggling with is how we'll ever know whether it was effective.
Well, I think Mr. Cornell might want to say something on this, but there is a report. There are these things are assessed as to how many PPAs we've had and what the outcomes are.
But never how much officer time went into them.
Well,
Mr. Cornell?
Sorry, as we're billing, we would know.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Cost agreements. Sorry, Mr. Cornell.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only nervousness with the direction of travel here is that it's my understanding, and perhaps Russell Fitzpatrick can assist if I'm wrong here, but they have to be very much cost recovery fees. So I think we may be going down the wrong track slightly here, and perhaps the focus should be, as you say, Chairman, on maximising billing through more accurate recording of time spent and so on. So I just want to offer a little caution on looking for an inflation plus increase on PPAs themselves.
Yes, Chairman, I can confirm that it is the cost is what you can recover as a discretionary cost is the cost of delivering the service.
That's right.
It seems to me to be a little, lest I say, random at the moment to simply be saying, well, let's just add this amount on, let's just add that amount on, without actually having undertaken a review as to what the cost of running the service is.
Is there something that could perhaps be added to the work programme? Because I think that we're at risk of doing something on the hoof.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we are, but it never has any harm to have information.
Sorry to come back, as I said some time ago now. We do have base data for how much an officer's time costs.
Quite.
Yeah. And that is more granular with regard to planning performance agreements. They are exactly the same as pre-apps, exactly. But what I was going to say is, as I emphasised, because at the start of the conversation, and I think some councillors were saying there should be an even bigger increase in pre-application fees. And one of the reasons I warned against that is a more granular assessment of exactly how much time is devoted to a site visit. Yeah. But based on what I call baseline data and a fairly conservative benchmarking exercise, I think this is about right.
Okay, Mr. Cornell, do you want to come back once more?
Yeah, very, very quickly, Chairman. And just to say, with planning performance agreements and the pre-application advice, let's not forget the purpose of these services is the kind of ethos of right first time with our customers. And what we're really trying to do is make sure planning applications get processed quickly, smoothly, and all the rest of it. Now, there's a lot of evidence that we've hit the sweet spot over the last few years with that. So, not against the rises, as such, because I appreciate it's difficult times, but I think we need to keep in mind what the driver of this service really is, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor English, it is your
my driver here was not to make a profit, because I'm fully aware that you can't do that, but to actually ensure that we were not losing money on aspects of service, and to follow up the point, as Mr. Jarman rightly made, that costs should be roughly consistent across the services we run, where the service is roughly consistent, and therefore if we're looking at the appropriate increase in pre-application discussion fees, we should be looking at the PPAs as well. I'm not saying that we agree an off the top of the head figure here and now. I'm just saying that this committee should, in my view, record that we would like Mr. Jarman to do a bit more than say that's the logical direction of travel, but to actually give us an indication as part of this process of sorting out our budget going forward, that as to what we can realistically and appropriately do in this area, rather than saying, oh yes, that's logical.
So can I seek clarity from you whether you're making a motion or a request for the work programme?
I don't care. Well, a request is fine as long as it's recorded that we need to look at making sure that we have not left this issue hanging in the air, and we actually do bring forward a report on whether we should be increasing these charges to minimise our costs.
So sorry to press you on this. Do you want that reported back to the committee, or do you want it left to head of service discretion?
No, I want it to come. Oh, sorry, right. I should have been clear. I want it back to this committee so we can make an informed decision as to whether we need to do something more, which I think was open to if it's the appropriate thing.
Right. If we add that request to the work programme to be considered at agenda setting, then please, Ms. Parfitt. That being the case, I think we've topped and tailed this one. Is anybody moving per the papers?
I will, if you like.
I'll second, Chairman.
Can I call the vote then, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Burton?
Abstain.
Councillor Clark?
For.
Councillor English?
For.
Councillor Garton?
Against.
Councillor Mrs. Grigg? For. Councillor Mackay?
For.
Councillor Mumford?
For.
Councillor Perry?
Against.
Councillor Springett?
Against.
That is 5 for, 3 against, 1 abstention. That is carried, Chairman.
Okay, that concludes this item. Thank you all involved.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councillor.
It might have happened while you was off, or whatever you were doing. There was one area of agreement, and probably the only area of agreement was the King Street cycle path. And I suggested that, along with Councillor Springer, that can this committee make a representation to KCC to either remove it or compensate in the loss of parking charges along that route?
I'll second that.
Agreed.
Okay. A couple of ways we could handle this, I think. One is that we could make that representation at the Joint Transportation Board, which is where this is going to be discussed next. Because that could derive a recommendation to the cabinet member. If we don't do it that way, I don't know how KCC will respond to it.
I'm happy to do that, Chairman.
If that's your advice, I accept it.
I think technically the deadline for considering agenda items is closed, or is it still open for JTB?
It has closed, Chairman.
Is it worth trying to get it raised as an urgent item, because they promised us a consultation in December on this scheme and it's clearly not going to happen?
From memory, there is a report on the active travel schemes on the JTB agenda.
Okay, right. That's fine.
I'm sort of saying that and looking for a bit of confirmation from Ms. Parfitt if she can recall.
A request has been made of that nature.
So I think that gives us the hook to raise it at that meeting.
Okay.
Let's take that as our first approach, and then we can consider it further if that doesn't get any traction.
Well, could we ask you to verbally report back to this committee the result of that?
Yes. I mean, of course, many of this committee may be on that board as well, and we would welcome visiting members to speak to this effect as well. But yes, I'm happy to report back after the event. Okay, right. That does conclude that item. So we are moving back to 16 now, please. Mrs. Ironmonger is going to help us by introducing the Maidstone Authority Monitoring Report, please.
Hi, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The Maidstone Authority Monitoring Report meets the statutory requirements and reports on the period of the 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020. The AMR provides information on a variety of matters, including the preparation of the local plan review. Table 3.1 of the AMR has been reproduced in the committee papers for you this evening and outlines that the local plan review is on track to meet the timetable set out in the amended LDS. The Council is also required to publish information on SIL, and that is outlined in the infrastructure funding statement, which is an appendix to the AMR. Engagement under the duty to cooperate is also covered under the AMR requirements, and details of engagement that has taken place during the monitoring year is included again as an appendix to the AMR. Discussions that have taken place since that time will be recorded in the next iteration of the AMR. By that I mean post 31st of March 2020. The main body of the report looks at the implementation of policies within the adopted local plan by looking at the monitoring indicators. The indicators cover housing, employment, retail, gypsy and travellers, environment and infrastructure. Some of the key points that I'd like to note are: one, there are 134 net dwellings completed during the monitoring year, which brings the total completed dwellings to 7,741 for the plan period. This represents a shortfall of 206 against the 9-year target of 7,947 dwellings. Since 2016/2017, there has been a net loss of employment and retail floor space. This results in greater pressure to deliver land requirements over the remaining years of the plan. And as part of the local plan review, the approach to employment and retail land will be reviewed. Looking at the identified transport improvements associated with local plan site allocations within the adopted plan, 2 key highway schemes, which are HTNW4 and HTC1, were not on track for timely delivery. However, all the other schemes were. All highway schemes will be continued to be monitored over the course of the year. Thank you. Any questions?
Members, do I have any comment? I'm not. Councillor Garton.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for this report. It's a lovely long document, and I probably said the same a year ago when last annual report came out. It's a wonderful document. I do understand we have to provided as a statutory requirement. A lot of office hour time went into this, and so therefore, please, let's make use of it. Let's use this plan and take on board what is in this report. And it's really an eye opener on certain things. And if we don't use it, we will lose it, and we'll just be wasting taxpayers' money. Well done to the officers.
I mean, I think I could concur with what you're saying there. And, you know, I think this is all of the context and information that we need to be carrying, if you like, in our heads as we move forward with local plan review and other matters. You know, I note, for example, we refer to the duty to cooperate meetings in January. We're inviting a protocol to be brought to us so that we can actually see, you know, if the process is fit for purpose and how we're engaged in it, and the shortages on employment land and or the losses there, you know, we're addressing that in the local plan review. So I think none of this is wasted, but it's the snapshot of where we're at. I have been remiss in not inviting visiting members to contribute, and Councillor Round is asking for that. So although we would have normally taken him first, I'll invite him to speak now. Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. There are umpteen issues. I mean, whilst I respect the fact that it is a report, we have to do it, and we have to mention all the some key issues that we are actually achieving or maybe not quite achieving. There are some important issues which, whilst this is one agenda item and the local plan review is another item, they both correspond with each other. So there's things that I think we ought to note in this monitoring report to consider for our local plan review. And first and foremost, we may slightly have under-delivered on housing, but we're more than over-delivered on gypsy and traveller provision. Considerably more. When you look at the figures of 466 counted units in July 2018 to what was a summer figure of 744, we have considerably more than delivered what it anticipated to be. And this only bodes for our new gypsy and traveller assessment. So that's an important consideration that we really need to think about, and I think we need to think about it in a far bigger way than just by expecting a few sites to be pitched up in a few fields. We need far better thinking about this, and I am pleased to see that Communities, Housing and Environment are addressing it in the next meeting. So there's a lot more debate to be had on that subject. Another issue I want to consider is that we've woefully not delivered in a section which hasn't been mentioned, and that is care home provision. Care homes are C2 provision, and we're looking at generally C3 homes provision. I'm sure there are different ways in which we can deliver what is ultimately a need for people who are experiencing disability and elderly problems. And there needs to be some sort of different ways of helping out proper community housing, where they are both market housing and they are affordable housing to support people that are in an area which is expanding. It's a considerable part of the demographic of this country, that we've got people living longer and living more valued lives. And there has to be something between the standard house and the care bed. For the value of everybody, we need better housing to suit that requirement. So that's another issue that really does need to be addressed in the local plan review, because these figures here we're just not delivering care beds, and the ones that we have delivered were very specialist defined ones. So there's another issue there. I'm going to leave it probably to Ashley Kimmons, who's probably going to go on to my other issue, but truly, following what I said about C2 and C3s, we really need a better delivery for some form of better community housing, in my opinion. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Well noted, Councillor Round. There was an implication that Councillor Kimmons wanted to come in. Is that right, or? You're still just observing.
Well, I was just observing, but Councillor Round hit me exactly where he knew that I have a sweet spot, which is obviously affordable housing. So we need to make sure that we have the affordable housing bit. But I'm not going to go on because I was only going to observe tonight, so I'll leave it there.
Thank you for your comments there. Councillor English is an indication.
Yes, as some officers and members will know, I've been concerned about this sort of issue for some time. What we have at the moment is a local plan which is very much about delivering the maximum number of housing units without any real consideration as to any detailed consideration as to any nuance, whether it's the issues that Councillor Round was talking about, the development of genuinely social housings such as cooperatives, or giving support to small and medium enterprise builders, co-housing, you name it. We have not got either the evidence base or the policy base to support that, and unless we change our ways, we're not going to have for quite some time. So I do think we need to, I've been saying this for some years, we do need to change our approach.
I think I could be bold enough to say that we all agree with what's being said here across the piece. Are there any further indications on this item? We're asked to note. I think we have done so. If there's no dissent, we will record it as noted. Thank you. And so next to item 17, Infrastructure Funding Statement 2020. And for this, we have Mr. Jarman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a new beast, the Infrastructure Funding Statement. It's a statutory requirement, and we have to get one published by the 31st of December. The report is for noting so that the Infrastructure Funding Statement can be publicised on our website. The main driver for this is that the government want local planning authorities to be transparent with the amount of developer contributions coming in and what that monies are being spent on. The Infrastructure Funding Statement is contained within Appendix 1, and it replaces the SIL 123 list, which members might remember. So, to be straightforward about it, the Infrastructure Fund sets out the income and expenditure relating to both SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, and Section 106 legal agreements for the last financial years, 2019 to 2020. As I say, this is a new annual report and provides a summary of all financial and non-financial developer contributions received by this council. The IFS is a key document in communicating how developer contributions are achieving the infrastructure set out in the council's plans, notably the council's own adopted local plan. This committee will allocate community infrastructure levy monies following a bidding process, and in turn the infrastructure delivery plan informs the prioritisation of these projects. Section 106 is a different animal. The monies collected on the back of Section 106s must be spent on the projects as specified. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from anyone? Mr. Jarman, can I just make sure I'm understanding when you say the IFS is a replacement for the 123 list? So The 1, 2, 3 list disappears, doesn't exist anymore, or is this just the way it's reported?
The 1, 2, 3 list sets out what SIL will be, community infrastructure levy monies will be spent on. So basically, that's off-site infrastructure. What Section 106 is concentrate on, and SIL covers up the rest, if you like. Section 106 is obviously have a focus on two main issues. One, the provision of affordable housing, and secondly, on-site provision, usually of open space. But SIL covers the rest. So junction improvements, SIL, apart from Lenham, education, either primary or secondary, SIL, doctor's surgeries, SIL, etc., etc. And that was all contained in the 1, 2, 3 list, but now there's a section on what SIL covers.
Okay, I think I've got that. If there are no indications from members, we're invited to note this, and then it will be published, I think, on the website. If there's no dissent, we shall record it as noted. That is noted. Thank you. And now we move on. Item 18, our standing item, local plan review date, and actually this is going to be introduced by Mr. Gilbert and not as advised earlier. Mr. Gilbert, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The report presented is an update on the local plan review, specifically the preferred approaches consultation and current position with regards to the government's proposed housing need reforms consulted on earlier this year. With reference to the local plan review, at its meeting on the 9th of November 2020, the committee approved the local plan review Regulation 18 preferred approaches consultation document, together with the sustainability appraisal for consultation between the 1st and the 22nd of December 2020. The consultation has now started. To make the consultation most effective ahead of the opening of the formal consultation period, officers have undertaken a comprehensive pre-consultation program. This has included briefings with key stakeholders, including infrastructure providers and regulatory bodies, parish councils, relevant Kent County Council members with wards in Maidstone Borough, the Kent Association of Local Councils, a private developers forum, as well as meetings with Kent County Council and neighbouring local planning authorities. As noted at the start, the report also provides members with an update on the proposed government planning reforms consulted in August 2020. Specific details are outlined in paragraphs 1.6 and 1.9 of the report. In summary, a formal response from the government on the consultation has not yet been published and no timescale for one has been given. But it has been reported widely in the press that the government are considering adjusting the proposal to rebalance the proposed housing need more evenly across England. Lastly, members should be aware that officers are monitoring the key risks to the local plan review process, and a summary of these has been provided in the report in paragraph 1.9. The report is for noting, but if members have any questions, I'll gladly take them now. Otherwise, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. No indications currently. This may not be entirely appropriate to this item, but I wanted to just ask if we have any mechanism in place for identifying significant errors in the consultation document. And the one that comes to mind is on page 77 concerning Heathlands. There's under transport connections, potential connection, new M20 junction, junction 8. And then on page 83, where it talks about Lidsing, the same requirement for a junction on the M20 appears. And I just wondered if we'd had a mechanism in place that captured these and maybe put amendments into the digital copies online. you don't need to necessarily answer that now, but, and as I said, it doesn't directly link to this item, but it was just an opportunity to raise it. Councillor Mumford.
Just one on the consultation, and I've raised this subject before. We have a responsibility for disabilities, and dyslexia, or whatever it's called, is a disability and it's recognised. With the COVID situation and the way we're consulting, it doesn't really give access to that, because normally we can cover that by going out with consultation groups and speaking to people. I'm concerned, but is there any way that this can be addressed? Because at the moment, somebody who is dyslexic is actually stopped from taking part in the consultation to an extent.
I don't know if there's an officer comment on that, but I do recall that quite a few committees back, we did receive notice of the government's emergency regulations around this that required us to press ahead regardless, and acknowledge that the digital format was probably going to be the mainstay to it, and didn't really give us much accommodation for issues such as you've just raised. But I don't know if officers can elaborate on that further.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. It's Mark Edgerton here. I'm certainly very happy to take that back to the Council's Equalities team, raise that as a particular issue, and take their advice on that matter. So I'm grateful to Councillor Mumford for raising that. It is obviously, as you say, in light of the government's COVID legislation and the nature of the emphasis on digital online, but I will take that back to the Equalities team. And in respect of the couple of errors you've pointed out there, Councillor Burton, I'm very happy to obviously provide an amendment online on the website, just pointing out that these have been drawn to our attention and clarifying the intention of those two policy areas and correcting the correct motorway junctions, for example. So more than happy to put that online. Thank you.
That was very helpful on both counts. We are in uncharted territory, A, from the point of view of the speed that we're moving this forwards, and B, the restrictions that COVID has placed upon us. So, I think if we react in the way that you've just suggested there as we discover these things, that's entirely appropriate. Are there any further comments from anyone? Again, we'd simply ask to note that, and if there's no dissent, we'll record it as noted. Noted. I'd like to thank everybody, officers and members and observers, for their time this evening and their contributions. And Councillor Mrs. Grigg is going to chip in with something that I probably overlooked. Please do.
I was just going to thank you as well, sir.
Oh, right, you're too kind. But thank me most for now declaring the meeting closed, and we can all go and have a little bit of our evening left. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is now closed.
Dave, I did stay to the end.
Thanks, David.
And it's no